Chile, the forces of reaction succeeded in keeping in place the country's destructive Pinochet-era constitution. A multi-year effort by the left to rewrite Chile's governing document ended in defeat on Sunday as voters rejected the new text 62 to 38%. It's a reversal from just 2 years ago when 80% of the country voted to draft a new constitution following massive riots a year earlier. A slate of progressive delegates were elected to a new constitutional convention in 2021. And at the end of the year, the country elected a leftist president, Gabriel Boric, who supported the newly written constitution. The product they came up with was a sweeping charter that would have put an end to the market-controlled economy instituted in the 1980s and 90s by the military dictator Augusto Pinochet. It guaranteed a right for all citizens to healthcare, housing, and education, and a pension. It put in place safeguards to protect the environment from capitalist extraction. It protected access to abortion and, for the first time, enshrined rights for indigenous people in the country. It was a visionary document, one that could serve as a model for the left around the world. But in the weeks leading up to the plebiscite, the right in Chile unleashed a sustained disinformation campaign that tanked approval of the new constitution. It included claims that the new text would force the country to change its name, its flag, its national anthem. All of that was nonsense. There were allegations that the new constitution would allow mass confiscation of private property. Buddy, I wish, but that wasn't true either. That it would permit abortions all the way up until the day of delivery. There were also absurd claims that gained traction that the new constitution would outlaw the purchase of bottled water and ice. Just days before the election, a group of Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. penned an urgent letter to executives of social media companies about the disinformation campaign circulating on their networks in Chile. But Capitol in the U.S., just like Capitol in Chile, was pleased to see the new constitution defeated. Heading into the vote, the financial press published a stream of editorials warning against the reforms. The Washington Post editorial board, for example, wrote a piece last month calling on voters to reject the document. Why? Well, read the first sentence of the editorial and it's clear that it's all about neo-colonial exploitation. Quote, lithium is a key input in batteries that run millions of laptops and upon which the United States is basing its electrified automotive future. Chile sits atop the world's largest lithium reserves. It produced about 25% of the world's commercial supply in 2020. That's reason enough to pay attention to Chile's impending September 4th referendum on a proposed new constitution. It would recast the legal framework for mining in the South American nation, which has an 18-year-old free trade agreement with the United States. In other words, U.S. businesses need their access to cheap lithium preserved. And historically, capitalist interests don't fuck around with that stuff. When Chile's elected socialist president Salvador Allende moved to nationalize copper mines in the 1970s, he was deposed and murdered in a coup supported by the U.S. and backed by American copper mining companies. Financial Times editorial board also criticized the new constitution ahead of the election, calling it seriously flawed, and like the dipshits at the Post, the editorialists at the Financial Times honed in on preserving access to Chile's resources for profiteers. Quote, worryingly for business, the document erodes property rights. Chile is the world's biggest copper producer and its second biggest exporter of lithium. But the draft charter creates so much legal uncertainty that it risks deterring the big investments needed for new mines. The neoliberal press was gleeful about the new constitution's defeat. The Economist wrote, quote, common sense triumphs as Chileans reject new constitution. The Wall Street Journal's editorial board, the same nonsense. Chile saves its democracy. So yeah, all the ghouls are rejoicing over this. Meanwhile, the left in Chile plots what comes next. President Boric is meeting with congressional leaders in the country to discuss calling a second constitutional convention to produce a less ambitious rewrite. Conservative parties in the country will likely seize on the vote results to demand greater input in the next drafting process, and they will have strong allies in the financial press here in the US and around the world that want to ensure the ghost of Pinochet continues to haunt Chile. Hey, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our new videos. Also, if you want to see Means Morning News in its complete form, not just the clips we post here, head on over to Means TV and get access to all our new episodes and our entire backlog, plus tons of other great movies and original TV shows.